I think we can be optimistic that the DNA of the Hungarian foreign policy will really change. The other big loser is obviously Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. The political change that happened can only be compared to the democratic transition of 1989-1990. And Viktor Orbán's campaign almost exclusively focused on foreign policy issues, the alleged threat that was represented. And if I can use that very non-academic term, the Americans have been overdoing it. The Orbán regime was the most strategic asset of the Russians in EU decision-making. That the defeat of Viktor Orbán pushed all of these Central European illiberals in the direction of self-moderation. And what Péter Magyar succeeded is really translating for the everyday Hungarian citizen in a very convincing way how...
Welcome back to OSTpolitik studio. Today we are joined by Daniel Hegedűs, Deputy Director of the Institute für Europäische Politik in Berlin and one of the leading analysts of Hungary, democratic backsliding, rule of law and new authoritarian developments inside the European Union. Daniel's work focuses on the intersection between autocratization and foreign policy, the democratic legitimacy of the EU and the politics of Central and Eastern Europe, especially Hungary and the Visegrad region. We invited Daniel today to discuss Hungary after the elections, why Orbán lost, what Péter Magyar's new government may change and what it may not, and what this moment means for the European Union, for Ukraine, Russia, and the future of illiberal but also liberal politics in Europe. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a great honor having you.
Thank you for the invitation, Bidzina, and thank you for having me.
Thanks. Okay, I want to start with the first question about Viktor Orbán's defeat. So why did Orbán lose now? Was this mainly because of democratic fatigue, corruption, and the list of other problems that existed in Hungary? Or also because of Péter Magyar's political appeal? And also, did Orbán's campaign strategy, especially the use of Ukraine, fear politics, foreign threat narratives, did they simply lose effectiveness or did they also kind of backfire in the elections?
Yes, I think this is a question that will be investigated for a long time in the future by analysts and scholars. And my short answer would be that actually all of them, so all of the reasons what you mentioned. But if I should summarize briefly the most important factors, what I consider to be really decisive, then on the one hand, it's the loss of the output legitimacy of the Orbán regime, particularly in the sense of the economic legitimacy and economic performance due to the stagnation practically since 2020-2021 in the country's economy. And this was overlapped early 24, parallel with the emergence of this new opposition alternative, the party Respect and Freedom, that's abbreviated in Hungarian as TISA, actually also with another downfall of the government party, and that was actually the loss of their normative appeal. Early 2024, several child abuse scandals have shaken the Hungarian society, which highlighted certain connections between the criminals who were in charge of children in state supervised step homes and their connections potentially to the highest circles of the governing party in Hungary. And if a party in the same time is losing its normative appeal in the sense that most of the voters are not necessarily seeing them anymore as pro-family, conservative political power that for whom those values really matter, they lose their economic legitimacy, and in the same time they face actually a domestic political challenge unseen over the past 16 years, then it creates a very, very vulnerable situation. And why this challenge was so new in their characteristics and quality, I think for two reasons. First, Péter Magyar and the Tisza party succeeded in delivering a political work no other old opposition party was able to achieve since the late 2000s, which was penetrating the fabric of the rural Hungarian society outside of the larger urban centers, and actually reach those citizens, and also translating how the regime led by Prime Minister Orbán and the lack of good governance is really impacting the everyday life. Before 2024, there was a thumb rule among Hungarian political analysts and scientists, and it was that with the topic of corruption, the opposition cannot effectively mobilize Hungarian voters and cannot win elections. And what Péter Magyar succeeded, and I'm coming to the end of my arguments, is really translating for the everyday Hungarian citizen in a very convincing way how the existing networks of high-level strategic corruption in Hungary contribute to their everyday bread and butter challenges and problems, and to the low level of public services they face, from education to the health service, and actually to the state of the public infrastructure. And I think these were the most fundamental issues, but obviously also the campaign strategies of the opponents clearly played in the hands of Tisza. Prime Minister or ex-Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's campaign almost exclusively focused on foreign policy issues, the alleged threat that was represented by Ukraine to the security and sovereignty of Hungary, the foreign meddling of European and liberal forces. And somehow it became contradicting that there is allegedly a party, Fidesz, that is a sovereignist and nation-oriented political force, while is talking exclusively about foreign policy issues and is endorsed on daily or weekly basis by foreign politicians, from leading politicians and personalities in the Trump administration to the European far and radical right, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while there is allegedly a globalist opposition force which does nothing else, really just focuses on domestic issues, talks to the people. Their main politicians are in the campaign period constantly in small municipalities all around the country, and who are not necessarily meeting with representatives of international politics. And I think this contradiction, again, significantly undermined the credibility of the discourse of Fidesz, and in some way resulted in a sort of crisis also of the international networking of radical right parties, because it raised the question whether that level of interconnectedness and networking and mutual support potentially is not hurting more these parties than really effectively providing a support in electoral contests.
Great, thanks very much. I have a couple of questions about the last point you mentioned, but before that, I want to ask about what comes next now in Hungary after the victory of Péter Magyar and the Tisza party. So they promised not only to change the government, but also to change the system, the old system. But what does it mean also in practice, and whether you see also some kind of danger of reproducing the old structures under new government?
Yes, I think we are in a very rare historical situation when the Hungarian society actually belongs to the most optimistic ones in Europe. It very rarely happens throughout centuries. And I think this optimism is rooted in the fact that, first, Certainly a change of government already happened. Whether there will be a regime change really in a structural sense, we will be able to observe in the coming months or practically in the next 1.5 years. But which is certain that at the level of the social perception, a democratic revolution or an electoral revolution happened in Hungary. And it's a widespread perception, both in the public, but also among everyday citizens, that this election result and actually the political change that happened can only be compared to the democratic transition of 1989-1990. And obviously, with the historical mindset, this claim appears to be somehow inflated. And I see that potentially the international perception of this claim is not so obvious than in the Hungarian context. But we need to take into consideration the following factors. The democratization in 1989-1990 happened in the context of an international democratic wave, when practically the entire Central and Eastern European region democratized. And it happened mainly as an elite-led project, where a large part of the Hungarian society and also a large part of other Central and Eastern European societies ultimately got the impression that they were not heard and they were not actively participating in or contributing to that democratization process. The political change or shift in 2026 in Hungary is happening against a larger European, Western, and global wave of autocratization. So it's actually countercyclic. And if anything, it's very deeply grassroots democratic and not elite-led. And against that background, I think what happened in 2026 will, or at least can, potentially shape in a positive form much longer the democratic self-perception and the democratic culture of the Hungarian society than actually 1989, 1990 was able to do so. So this is just a background of the perception, really domestic Hungarian perception of this political change. Whether the new government with its constitutional supermajority really will be able to dismantle the state capture that Prime Minister Orbán constructed over the past 16 years, that remains to be seen. Actually, the political authorization is there, but there are certain challenges. One is what you also mentioned, that how can actually the rule of law restored in a way that it's still in conformity with the procedural requirements of the rule of law. And my understanding is that in spite of this huge authorization on the part of the Hungarian society, potentially we will be able to see in the next 12, 18, 24 months a very similar constitutional engineering process that actually the first Orbán government delivered after 2010. So a gradual reshaping of the Hungarian constitutional system, but now with a different motivation and actually pointing in a different direction, because now the main goal is to restore the independence of these constitutional institutions. There would be an opportunity actually to get rid of the political appointees who still might represent the political interest of the old governing party Fidesz on the top of these institutions, and that would be wiping out the entire Hungarian state and constitutional system through adopting a new constitution. I don't think that it will happen, most likely because on the one hand, Péter Magyar already announced that they will not pass a new constitution without the consent of other parties, and I don't see this consent emerging either within or outside of the Hungarian parliament. And second, because I think that clear cut with all of the traditions of the Hungarian state raison, to put it that way, would be seen in a rather contradictorious way, both by the Hungarian society, but in some way potentially also by the EU institutions. So instead of this tabula rasa new constitution, we will see gradual constitutional amendments. And of course, then is the question whether you can remove the president, whether you can remove constitutional judges that way. My answer is rather no. So obviously, the formal constitutional independence of those institutions need to be taken into consideration, and the behavior of Péter Magyar and the Tisza party, that he is repeatedly calling for the resignation of the office holders. He is repeatedly calling for the resignation of the president of the Constitutional Court, the president of the Hungarian Supreme Court, Curia, is also pointing in the direction that he understands that it can be very, very difficult in a legal way. So if he can succeed with building up political pressure and actually convincing or pushing those persons into resignation, then he has a much easier job to re-establish independence or retake organizations than if he really needs to do that with a constitutional supermajority. But no precise plans exist in the sense of constitutional law, how to restore liberal constitutionalism in the country. And with regard to expectation management, I think it's important that we understand that no breakthrough can be achieved without a very controversial new constitution just in months. So rather, we need to expect a potentially years-long constitutional engineering process.
Okay. Thanks, Daniel. I want to zoom in on ideological profile or programmatic profile of Tisza party and Péter Magyar. Now, they are not a progressive party, as I understand. They are more national conservative party to some extent. So I want to ask further. So we talked about the reasons why Viktor Orbán lost, but this could be also relevant for many other countries that have hybrid regimes or illiberal regimes. And so, what kind of opposition is needed to defeat a liberal regime, and whether the ideological profile of Tisza party and Péter Magyar and their program also played the role in Viktor Orbán's defeat. So you mentioned their strategies, right? So their strategies, their election campaign was very effective. But did also their ideological profile or ideological coherence or incoherence played the role there? And also to link to also what you said in your last response. So should we expect certain policies or certain continuities also from the new government, not changes only, but also continuities in some policy areas, both domestic and foreign policy?
Thank you. These are a couple of questions.
Questions, yeah.
I would start potentially with the strategy, what other international actors can learn from the success of Tisza in Hungary. And I think the strategy itself was not invented by Tisza. This is this so-called broad tent or broad coalition strategy that was tried and in certain cases also tested throughout the democratic world, and not only in the West, but also outside of the West, for example, in a Latin American context. What is potentially a bit more unique in the Hungarian case, that this broad tent opposition movement has had a core center-right, moderate, conservative ideological characteristics. And if we would like to do one step further and try to answer the question, okay, and what's the ideological profile of Tisza? Then the answer is it's complicated, because I think we can give different answers respectively, whether we take a look on the party and Péter Magyar itself, and we should not forget that the party doesn't even have 40 members. Whether we take a look on the ideological profile of the parliamentary group, which itself has the size of 3 times of the party, or the electorate. And if we start with the first level, with the party and Péter Magyar, then I think it's a moderate center-right nationalist conservative party. And if I need to find potentially the closest comparison on the European party landscape, that it would be the Civic Platform of Poland. And it's not an accident that we see actually very intense party diplomatic rapprochement by these two political forces, and in certain respect that Poland serves as a sort of model for TISA, not how to restore constitutionalism and the rule of law. I think there we won't have too much similarities, but how actually you can build up and manage a center-right party that's really dominating and shaping the party system itself in the country. If the question is what's the ideological profile of the parliamentary group, then that's very diverse, because we have more than 140 absolute newbies who arrive to Hungarian politics without past experience. Most of them are, just like Péter Magyar himself, I think, very pragmatic when it comes to politics, and their political behavior is not necessarily guided by ideological presumptions, but rather by very pragmatic and very pragmatic calculations. So, but Péter Magyar used to be very effective in controlling his movement and his party even during the past 2 years, and I don't expect him actually losing this control in the future. But when it comes to the electorate, I think there we might potentially draw different conclusions. Behind the electoral result of Péter Magyar are not only those previously undecided voters or unsatisfied Fidesz voters. He was effectively able to address and win to vote for TISA, but actually all previous old opposition voters. And regarding their political profiles, a large part of these old opposition voters are progressive, left-leaning, liberal, green voters. And they don't necessarily feel being represented by Péter Magyar and TISA in all of the circumstances. It doesn't mean that they will necessarily leave TISA. And I think, again, this is the point where the parallels to Poland can be useful. So TISA has a genuine chance to really become a catch-all party, in the sense the civic platform is in Poland, and be able to gather actually a very diverse electorate who find the party to be the main representative of democratic values in the Hungarian party system. They have a chance, but it's not given. And if they are not delivering in a convincing way that they can keep actually this progressive voters, then we will have another scenario, which is that the Hungarian progressive political spectrum will have an opportunity to reorganize itself during this parliamentary period. They are not represented in the parliament, but even with the actual relative majoritarian electoral system, there is a chance for a progressive party relying on a very urban educated electorate to get a couple of MPs in the parliament, particularly from the electoral districts of Budapest.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I want to also ask about Hungary's foreign policy under the new government. So what do you expect, both in terms of change and in terms of continuity, Hungary under Viktor Orbán mostly acted as a veto player and as a spoiler of US common foreign and security policy decisions on Ukraine, on Russia, on other issues. So what do you expect in this regard? What will change and what will remain the same?
Yes, thank you so much. Of course, we could discuss at least an hour long about this topic. Very briefly, I think we will see an end of the Hungarian blockade and veto behavior at EU level. This is almost certain. Practically, the change in government already achieved a breakthrough with regard to the 90 billion EU financial aid package to Ukraine before the new Hungarian government entered office. We see that Péter Magyar's position regarding the start of the accession negotiations with Ukraine is not so obvious, and there was at least a smaller rhetoric U-turn over the past couple of days. But it's also a matter of fact that the official position is to give new fundaments for the bilateral relationships with Ukraine. He initiated a Ukrainian-Hungarian summit with President Zelensky, and even if he emphasizes the importance of minority rights provided by Ukraine to the Hungarian minorities living in Transcarpathia, I think he could barely allow himself, practically making the impression at EU level that he continues with the blockade. I am not arguing that there will be certainly an obvious and immediate breakthrough at the June meetings before the June meetings between the two head of states and governments, but I think we can be optimistic that the DNA of the Hungarian foreign policy will really change. If we take a look, I think there are certain very specific policy areas where I expect rather fundamental changes. One is particularly the Western Balkan politics of the new government. The Balkan politics of Viktor Orbán was very heavily Serbia-focused, and Hungarian diplomacy very often used even sharp power tools to destabilize Western Balkan countries and to interfere into their domestic affairs. I just would like to mention very briefly the permanent Hungarian support to Republika Srpska and the former Prime Minister Milorad Dodik, or the Hungarian interventions in North Macedonian politics and providing support to VMRO-DPN. And instead of this approach that very often actually overlapped with Serbian and Russian strategic interest in the region, I think we will see a much more constructive and, due to energy security reasons, much more Croatia-focused Hungarian Western Balkan politics. And of course, this is not necessarily what outsiders would consider to be big shifts. But if there is an international loser of the change of government in Hungary, then that is President Vučić in Serbia, because his support base within the European Union will be weaker. The presence of destabilizing actors on the Western Balkans will be weaker, and I think in a slight form this could actually enhance the chance of more stabilization and more successful EU accession procedures among Western Balkan candidates. Where, on the other hand, I see rather more continuity. This is certainly the relationship to the United States. So if we listen, for example, to the hearings of Anita Orbán, the new Hungarian foreign minister, who has the same family name as Prime Minister Orbán, but they are not relatives, then she emphasizes several times that the strategic partnerships between the United States and Hungary will remain unaffected. And of course, Prime Minister Orbán made headlines very often due to this close ideological proximity to the MAGA movement, and particularly to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance himself or themselves. But if we take a closer and less ideological look, then it's obvious that a TISA government is much more compliant with with US interest in Central and Eastern Europe than Prime Minister Orbán used to be, particularly due to the different approaches to the People's Republic of China and in some way also to Russia. And there will be a very important anchor of continuity. And these are the energy cooperation agreements and contracts that were signed in November last year when Prime Minister Orbán visited Washington, D.C., and this February when Marco Rubio, State Secretary Rubio, visited Budapest about the purchasing of American oil, liquefied natural gas, and potential nuclear cooperation between the two countries. These are actually very important anchor points for the energy diversification away from Russia and the phasing out of the import of Russian fossil fuel in Hungary. And as mentioned, this is, for example, an example where we will see organic continuity in foreign policy terms between the Orbán government and the new Péter Magyar government.
But the US administration and the MAGA people, they also endorsed Viktor Orbán, right, during the elections. I wanted to ask how this landed in Hungary, also at the level of public perceptions. Did it play a role during the elections, and did it affect electoral outcome?
Yes, they did. And on the one hand, flexibility is an organic part of foreign policy. We already have seen that after the very clean and obvious electoral victory of Péter Magyar, Donald Trump himself announced that he's looking forward to the cooperation with the new leader of Hungary. There was a very intense, I would say, clear interference into the Hungarian election campaign, not in a legal sense interference, but in a political sense interference. And if I can use that very non-academic term, the Americans have been overdoing it. And it was clearly counterproductive because, as I mentioned, it strengthened the impression in the Hungarian society that actually for the governing party, for Fidesz and for Viktor Orbán, all of these international endorsements are much more important than taking care about domestic political issues, which didn't appear in the campaign and didn't really help the sovereignist narrative of Fidesz that they are standing for the interest of the Hungarian nation, where practically they received an extraordinary amount of external support. So in that regard, the track record of American interference in European elections, as it was laid out as a new strategic approach in the national security strategy last November, until now hasn't really appeared to be successful. We don't know what lessons will this administration draw, but I think the signs are clear that they will have a very constructive approach to partnership with the new Hungarian government.
Okay, thanks so much, Daniel. Before we finish, I also wanted to ask about Russia and about perceptions from Russia and what will change under the new Hungarian government in relations between Russia and Hungary.
We already mentioned that Serbian President Vučić was one big loser of the Hungarian election result. The other big loser is obviously Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. We have seen in the first responses that they try to distance themselves from this electoral defeat. And actually in the first communications coming from Moscow, the substance was that, yes, that's happened, but anyhow, Prime Minister Orbán has never been as a close ally of us as it was stated by Western media. Obviously, that's a face-saving measure. The former Hungarian government, or in a different form, the Orbán regime, was the most strategic asset of the Russians in EU decision-making, because no other pro-Russian or Kremlin-leaning political force, may that be on the radical right or the radical left, has had the same level of access to and influence on EU decision-making. For a long time, until Andrej Babiš won the last Czech elections, practically Fidesz and Viktor Orbán were the only representatives of. Babiš is not pro-Russian, but it's also not entirely pro-Ukrainian. But Viktor Orbán was the only representative of the patriots and the pro-Russian radical right at the council level and in the European Council. And we have seen since February 2022, Hungary regularly blocked, delayed, in certain cases, vetoed decision-making related to providing financial and military support to Ukraine, how they regularly dragged and watered down sanction packages aiming at Russia, and not having the same leverage over EU decision-making is obviously a strategic loss for the Russians. They might certainly try to find other venues to influence EU decision-making. There are also certain candidates regularly mentioned in international media, either Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico or the incoming Bulgarian Prime Minister Rumen Radev. In Radev's case, we will see. I think it's too early to draw a conclusion whether he will govern in the pro-Russian style he previously used to communicate. But in the case of Fico, I think we can clearly state that the defeat of Viktor Orbán pushed all of these Central European illiberals in the direction of self-moderation, because they were able to see that the model some people more wholeheartedly, others rather partially followed in the past couple of years, which appeared to offer a blueprint how to get in power and remain in power as an illiberal political actor within the European Union. That model failed. And while they certainly don't have immediate answers in which direction they would like to go, and they are in a reflection period, it's obvious that that direction is not offering immediate success. And against that background, my expectation is, and then I'm also finishing here, that the new political realities in Central and Eastern Europe without Viktor Orbán will be in some way closer to the European mainstream, and that also with regards to the approach to Russia and Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for being with us today and for guiding us to the situation in Hungary. It was great having you.
Thank you for the opportunity.